Welcome to my channel, where the scariest stories come to life. Before we dive into today's chilling tale, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story. Now, let's get into the horror. On July 27 of 2015, Russian homicide detectives arrested a murder suspect thought to have killed more than 13 innocent people over the course of a decade. The full and frank account of the slayings were truly horrifying, and the Russian people were appalled by what the media told them. However, it wasn't just the grisly details of the crimes that people found so shocking, nor was it the fact that the suspect was deemed such a danger to society that they were interred in a specialist institution for the criminally insane. It was more the fact that their suspect was a grandmother in her late 60s, standing a little more than 5 feet tall. But what on earth could such an unassuming little babushka have done to be deemed such a threat to those around her? This is the story of the St. Petersburg Baba Yaga. Tamara Samsonova was born in 1947 in the city of Luzher, a central Russian city of around 16,000, just a few hundred miles from the Mongolian border. After finishing high school, Tamara moved to the Russian capital of Moscow, enrolling in the city's state linguistics university to study English and German. After her graduation, she was assigned a position at the state-run and tourist travel agency and worked at the Grand Hotel Europe for more than 15 years. It was during her employment that she met her future husband, Alexei Samsonova, with the freshly married couple moving into a newly built panel house at number 4, Dimitrov Street in 1971. To all outside observers, the couple appeared to be leading perfectly happy lives, and if there was any marital discord, they certainly did a good job of hiding it. So when Tamara's husband mysteriously disappeared in the year 2000, she was the last person that the police considered to be a suspect. Despite law enforcement launching an extensive search for him, no trace of her husband was ever found. But Tamara didn't give up hope. She returned to the missing persons department of the St. Petersburg police many times over the years, pleading with them to find her beloved Alexei. Her efforts culminated with a visit to the investigative unit of the Frunzensky District Police, who promised that they would reopen her husband's case and work to give her the answers she'd waited more than a decade and a half for. But as they'd come to find out, Tamara was hardly the poor, innocent victim she made herself out to be, and it wasn't long before her horrendous criminal history would come to light. A suspicious package sat near to a pond set in a small piece of parkland right on Dimitrov Street, where Tamara lived. The package was noticed by several of the local residents, but illegal dumping proved to be a constant problem in the area, and it seemed everyone was too proud to clean up another's trash. So for almost a week, whatever was wrapped in what appeared to be an opaque shower curtain remained untouched. But when a disgusting smell started to emanate from the package, someone finally decided to investigate. We often imagine Russia as being a nation gripped by permafrost, a Siberian wasteland where the citizens treat vodka like human antifreeze. But during the summer, temperatures in St. Petersburg have been known to climb as high as 100 degrees, and July of 2015 proved to be a typically sweltering summer. We can only imagine how well and truly gag-worthy that package must have smelled in the oppressive heat and humidity, especially when it was unwrapped to reveal a terribly decomposed set of human remains. They were so butchered and rotten that the only way possible they could identify who they belonged to was to survey the local residents to discover who was missing. But when officers knocked on the apartment door of 79-year-old Valentina Ulanova, they found she wasn't home. Instead, Tamara Samsonova was living there. As it turned out, a mutual friend had asked Valentina for a small favor. Tamara was due to have work done on her home and needed a place to stay for a few weeks. Valentina was reluctant at first, but found Tamara to be a pleasant house guest who had no problem helping with housework, and after a while, Tamara became something of a nascent friend. Tamara lived in the apartment for several months, but only on the condition that she find somewhere else to stay after 3 or 4 months. However, when it came time for Tamara to find alternate lodgings, she found she had grown fond of the apartment and essentially refused to leave. Time and time again, Valentina implored Tamara to stick to her end of the bargain and leave the apartment before the relationship soured. Tamara was somehow prepared to go to war with Valentina over her own apartment, and it wasn't long before the pair were fighting like cats and dogs in the small, cramped living space. After one particularly vicious argument, Tamara took a trip to a small town known as Pushkin, located on the banks of the river Neva. It was here that she purchased one of Valentina's favorite dishes, an Olivier salad, a traditional Russian salad consisting of diced potatoes, carrots, peas, and various meats in a mayonnaise dressing. One could be mistaken for thinking that this was a gift, a token of reconciliation intended to repair Tamara's broken relationship with Valentina. But the gift would prove to be anything but an olive branch, as on the very same trip, Tamara visited a small pharmacist with a very unusual request. Although she didn't have a prescription, Tamara asked the pharmacist for a packet of phenazepam. Developed in the Soviet Union during the mid-1970s, phenazepam is used in the treatment of various mental disorders such as schizophrenia and anxiety. It provides a sedative effect, relieving tension and anxiety, and making the user feel calm and relaxed. It can also cause a loss of coordination, dizziness, and drowsiness. Big doses can make a user forgetful, send them to sleep, or even put them into a coma. Obviously, it's quite a powerful drug, and so at first, the pharmacist flat out refused to sell the pills to Tamara without the proper prescription. This prompted the elderly woman to beg the pharmacist, insisting that unless she received a dose soon, she would begin to suffer symptoms of paranoid schizophrenia, making her a danger to herself as well as to those around her. This put the pharmacist in quite the predicament. Give her the pills and risk losing his job and potentially jail time, or continue to refuse her and face the dangerous consequences of her apparent condition. And so the pharmacist gave Tamara the pills, thinking he was doing the right thing, but how wrong he was. When she returned to St. Petersburg just a few hours later, Tamara snuck into the kitchen of Valentina's apartment and began to prepare the Olivier salad. We can only imagine the scene that played out afterward. A heartfelt apology, the offer of a gift, a facade of reconciliation that played out just as Tamara intended. Valentina must have dug into the salad, having no idea that it was laced with obscenely high amounts of phenazepam. And as the drug began to take effect, Valentina drifted off into a sleep that she would never awaken from. It was on the night of July 23, 2015, when Tamara found Valentina's unconscious body. In a stand-up fight with her erstwhile flatmate, there was no guaranteeing that Tamara would win. But with her out for the count, there was nothing to stop Tamara from enacting her evil plans. She gathered up a number of household items, including steak knives, pliers, and a hacksaw, and began to brutally dismember her former housemate. It took the elderly woman a long time to do it, but eventually, she managed to completely decapitate Valentina. But once she was finished, she began the arduous task of sawing off her arms and legs. This is thought to have taken the elderly Tamara days to fully complete, in that she was forced to use smaller knives to shear off pieces of Valentina's flesh so that her remains would fit into a series of small plastic bags. There were so many of these bags that it took several trips to the dumpsters before Tamara put a serious dent into the disposal of her former roommate's body. It's thought that she was forced to simply wrap Valentina's torso in a shower curtain and dump it in the local pond. The job was so complex and labor-intensive that Tamara actually forgot that she left several pieces of Valentina's body just lying around the apartment, and as much as she tried to clean up the mess that she'd made, the sheer amount of gore splattered around the place was just too much work to stay on top of. Which is why, when police paid Valentina's apartment a visit in the wake of her disappearance, they found tons of evidence of her grisly handiwork. Not only did they find blood stains in the apartment's bathroom, but the fact that the shower curtain had been torn off showed it was her who had been responsible for the torso dumped by the pond. Tamara was immediately arrested on suspicion of murder, then taken to the Frunzinski District Police Station for detention. 4 months later, in November of 2015, the results of a psychiatric test that Tamara had been subjected to determined that she was a dangerously insane individual. Throughout numerous interviews that sometimes lasted hours at a time, Tamara hinted at up to 13 other murders that coincided with as many unsolved missing person cases. It was even speculated that she murdered her own husband, and that her attempts to seek justice for him were little more than a bizarre form of gloating. How even when she presented herself to the authorities, they were almost incapable of considering her a suspect. Tamara had even killed the tenant she rented a room to in the wake of her husband's death. According to investigators, on September 6 of 2003, she killed her 44-year-old tenant from Norilsk after an intense argument over rent payments. She then dismembered his corpse and disposed of it on the very same street she dumped Valentina's torso. According to Russian newspapers, police found a journal in Tamara's apartment which detailed some of the murders. One entry translated from Russian to English read, "I killed my tenant, Volodya, cut him into pieces in the bathroom with a knife, and put the pieces of his body in plastic bags and threw them away into different parts of the Frunzensky district." With this in mind, it's little wonder that Tamara felt comfortable enough to simply allow police officers into Valentina's apartment, the apartment that still bore so much evidence of her butchery. She must have felt invulnerable, having murdered in plain sight for years without being discovered. But perhaps most disturbing of all, in the process of recovering her victims' remains, police noticed that numerous internal organs had been removed from each of the bodies, the most common being the lungs. When confronted with this, Tamara made a shocking confession. She had taken to cutting out the lungs, liver, and kidneys of her victims, then stewing or frying them to be served as traditional Russian dishes. Tamara supposedly said it was delicious and a nutritious way to save money. What's more, Tamara's neighbor of 15 years, Marina Kravchenko, said that Tamara was obsessed with black magic and very interested in the maniac, Chikatilo, a reference to the infamous Soviet serial killer, Andrei Chikatilo. Chikatilo was the USSR's most prolific serial killer, one that was said not to exist because there couldn't possibly be murder in the workers' paradise that was the Soviet Union. The self-described vampire indecently assaulted, murdered, and cannibalized up to 52 people in the space of a decade, and reportedly enjoyed chopping out his victims' tongues, bursting their eardrums and gouging out their eyes. These details awakened a morbid fascination in Tamara, apparently inspiring her to commit similar acts of terror. Tamara's story is yet another case of a killer hiding in plain sight, taunting authorities with hints of her own guilt. We could even speculate that Tamara actually wanted to be caught, how only one last thing separated her from her beloved Andrei Chikatilo, the pure infamy of being known as one of Russia's most prolific serial killers. In December of 1927, detectives of the Los Angeles Police Department received a missing persons report for 12-year-old Marion Parker. She had vanished from the Mount Vernon Junior High School in the Lafayette Square section of LA after being excused from class, with her teacher saying that a co-worker of Marion's father had arrived to collect her. According to him, Perry Parker had been involved in a car accident and had summoned his family from his hospital bed, fearing it might be his last opportunity to see them. Naturally, Marion's teacher understood the severity of such a grim situation and immediately excused her from class. This teacher, Mary Holt, later claimed that she never would have let Marion go, but for the apparent sincerity and disarming manner of the man. Yet there's one little detail that this teacher appears to have overlooked, and that's how Marion had a twin sister in the same school, one that her father's co-workers seemed to have completely ignored. The very next day, her family filed a missing persons report, with her father claiming no knowledge of a car accident or his mysterious co-worker. The day after Marion's disappearance, a telegram was delivered to the Parker family home. The letter stated that Marion had been kidnapped and would only be returned unharmed if a ransom of $1,500 was paid using a series of $20 gold certificates. As proof of life, they included what was quite clearly Marion's handwriting, with the additional message of, "Do positively nothing till you receive special delivery letter." In those days, there was a small section of the telegram that stated who had sent it, and in this case, the author had signed their name as simply, Death. Missing persons detectives got to work trying to pin down where the telegram had been sent from, while Perry Parker began putting together the ransom. But as they busied themselves with the task of saving Marion's life, another telegram was delivered, apparently having been sent from nearby Pasadena. Marion is secure. Use good judgment. Interference with my plans is dangerous. This telegram was signed, The Fox, with the timing and content suggesting that Marion's kidnapper was watching the Parkers' every move from somewhere uncomfortably close by. The Parkers received yet another telegram, warning that no one will ever see the girl again except the angels in heaven. This one was signed with the word Fate. The obvious warning set Perry Parker into overdrive, and by that evening, he had not only collected the full ransom amount, he had also managed to arrange a time and location for an exchange. However, it seems that his daughter's kidnapper was well aware of his attempt to coordinate with police and recognized the supposed exchange as the trap that it was. Perry waited at the arranged location for several hours, with missing persons detectives observing from a concealed vantage point nearby, but the kidnapper didn't show. The next morning, the Parkers received a telegram in which the kidnapper's tone had radically shifted. They had signed the note with the word Thanatos, which one investigator recognized as the Greek word for death. The attached message was from a furious kidnapper, outraged that Perry had not only been in contact with the national press, but had also tried to snare him in what was quite obviously a sting operation. According to the kidnapper, it was their final day to exchange the gold certificates for their daughter. Failure to do so would result in her execution. The telegram also included a handwritten note, clearly written by the terrified young Marion, in which she begged her father to give in to the kidnapper's demands and to eschew any further police involvement. An enraging message from the kidnapper told Perry, "Recover your senses. I want your money rather than to kill your child. But so far, you have given me no other alternative. Fox is my name. Very sly, you know. Set no traps. I'll watch for them. Get this straight. Remember that life hangs by a thread. I have a Gillette ready and able to handle the situation." After an emotionally tumultuous meeting with the presiding missing persons detectives, Perry Parker was given permission to meet with the kidnapper alone, without a contingent of police, so that he might try one last time to save his daughter's life. That evening, Perry Parker was contacted by the kidnapper via telephone, and the pair arranged a new meeting place with an assurance that no police officers would be in attendance. They agreed on the location, being the corner of West 5th Street and South Manhattan Place in central Los Angeles. Then, around 7:15 in the evening, the kidnapper gave Perry the signal to drive out to the corner, telling him they knew which car he would be driving, and which direction he would be approaching from, further evidence that he was being closely observed, and possibly by more than one kidnapper. Perry arrived at the location and was almost immediately accosted by a masked man armed with a sawed-off shotgun. Driving a Chrysler coupe, the masked man revealed himself as the kidnapper and pointed to Marion in the back seat before demanding Perry hand over the ransom money. The girl's father could see her in the back seat. Her eyes were wide open, but she wasn't moving. He called out to her, but she didn't respond. She just stared straight ahead, her mouth slightly agape, with a hauntingly peculiar expression on her face. The kidnapper assured Perry that his daughter had been drugged lest she cause a scene, but was otherwise unharmed. When he handed over the package containing the ransom money, the kidnapper shoved Marion's body out of the car as he remarked, "There's your daughter." Then he cranked the vehicle into gear, put his foot down, and raced away from the scene. It should have been a relatively happy occasion, at least one in which a degree of relief was experienced. But there was something about the way his daughter's body had slumped out of the passenger seat, something about the way she lay motionless on the road in front of him. When he kneeled down to take her hand, Perry found Marion's flesh was stone cold. But that wasn't all. Her eyes were being held open with piano wire. The sleeves of her blouse were empty, as her arms and legs had been cut off. And after being disemboweled, whoever killed her had stuffed her abdominal cavity with a shirt and a towel. It was a living nightmare. No parent should have to see the lifeless corpse of their own child, but the horror of seeing it so horrifically mutilated is almost too much to comprehend. At 9 p.m. that night, Marion's body was taken for an autopsy. A coroner determined that she had been dead for around 12 hours, and that her killer had simply kept up the pretense of the kidnapping so he could get the ransom money too. Yet given the brutal nature of her killing, there's every chance that murdering her was the primary intention of her kidnapping, and that the ransom was just a depraved method of taunting her surviving family members. The following morning, a gentleman on a morning walk found a set of severed child's limbs in the Elysian Park. Each was wrapped in a piece of newspaper and appeared to have simply been tossed around randomly in plain sight so that some unfortunate soul might stumble across them. The murder was huge news all over the country. People were outraged, and rightly so. As a result, a huge manhunt for Marion's murderer commenced, involving over 20,000 police officers and local volunteers. Thanks to thousands of monetary contributions from the horrified general public, a reward of $100,000 was offered for information leading to the kidnapper's capture, the equivalent today of more than $1.4 million. Thanks to the massive search effort, investigators quickly found an abandoned getaway vehicle used by Marion's killer, identifying it as one stolen from San Diego just a short while previously. Fingerprints were taken from the door handle of the vehicle, but they matched none in the existing database. Police considered several suspects at first, including the son of a local dentist, but were cleared of suspicion after Mary Holt, the teacher who had spoken with Marion's abductor, confirmed none were her kidnapper. Investigators then managed to trace a laundry mark on the towel found stuffed inside Marion's torso to the Bellevue Arms apartments, where they interviewed a number of tenants. Then on December 20th, the fingerprints taken from the abandoned getaway vehicle were identified as belonging to William Edward Hickman, who was actually a former co-worker of Perry Parker. Both men were employed by the First National Bank of Los Angeles, where Parker worked as an assistant cashier and Hickman as an officer. The previous year, Hickman had been arrested on a complaint made by Perry regarding stolen and forged checks totaling $400, and as a result was convicted and sentenced to probation. Additional fingerprints lifted from the ransom letters were able to be positively identified as Hickman's. It was subsequently uncovered that Hickman had been a new resident of the Bellevue Arms, having moved into the building recently under the alias Donald Evans, after spending 6 months out in Kansas with family. It became horrifyingly clear that Hickman had left town after his conviction and may well have been plotting his terrible revenge the whole time. Evidence of his guilt was clear. Bloody fingerprints were found, along with partly burnt handwritten drafts of ransom letters and newspaper clippings, which detailed Marion's kidnapping. Just 2 days after the abandoned getaway car was found, an Oregon police officer recognized Hickman from a wanted poster, and after a brief but intense pursuit, Hickman was arrested in possession of around $1,400 worth of the gold ransom. At first, Hickman admitted involvement in the kidnapping, claiming he was a small part of a larger team and that someone else was responsible for murdering Marion. During an extensive interview with a journalist from the East Oregonian, Hickman implicated 2 other men, Oliver and Frank Kramer, as the brothers who carried out the murder. However, an extensive investigation by homicide detectives had determined that this was impossible, as the Kramer brothers had been incarcerated for several months on other charges. Not only that, but given that Hickman had prior knowledge of the Kramer criminal history, it's safe to assume that blaming the 2 men was just another part of his intricate plan for revenge. Police told Hickman the game was up, they knew everything, and his only chance at avoiding the hangman's noose would be to make a full confession. At that, Hickman broke down, admitting to strangling Marion while she was blindfolded and tied to a chair. He proceeded to hang Parker's body upside down in his bathtub, slicing her throat at the jugular vein to drain the body of blood. After disarticulating her arms and legs, he proceeded to disembowel her, during which he stated the body jerked with such force that it flew out of the tub, suggesting that she may have still been alive during the dismemberment. Hickman then wrapped Parker's limbs in newspaper before temporarily storing her torso in a suitcase. He then left the apartment, attempting to distract himself by watching a movie at the nearby Low State Theater. But unsurprisingly, he was unable to focus on anything but the atrocious act he just committed. And after bawling his eyes out in the dark movie theater, Hickman came up with a plan to, as he put it, make things right. He realized that Perry Parker would probably want to see his daughter one last time, before she was gone forever. With that in mind, he set about the grim process of reconstructing her butchered body, pinning her eyes open with wire, and even applying makeup to her face. Reflecting on the entire ordeal, Hickman told police that Marion felt perfectly safe and the tragedy was so sudden and unexpected that I'm sure she never actually suffered through the whole affair, except for a little sobbing which she couldn't keep back for her father and mother. We can only marvel at the twisted logic that Hickman employs here, believing that having subjected a small child to the most terrifying ordeal of her short life, he claims she didn't suffer. At his trial, Hickman tried to further distance himself from responsibility by claiming he was severely mentally ill. Hickman told his attorneys that he had killed Parker upon the direction of a supernatural deity he called Providence, a claim that was echoed by Hickman's defense attorney, who openly labeled his client as criminally insane and not responsible for his own actions. The attorney explained that Hickman was mentally ill and deeply influenced by his religious zealot grandfather during his youth. He was said to have frequently been exposed to frenzied religious exorcisms out of the limbo of his subconscious mind, subcharged with severe repressions of his awful childhood, homicide, and mutilation ideated. The jury saw through the elaborate charade and recognized Hickman as the vicious, vengeful, and evil man that he was, and after they found him guilty, Hickman was sentenced to death by hanging. During his final months, Hickman reportedly embraced Roman Catholicism and wrote letters of apology to his victim's family, but it's more than likely that this was just another attempt to aid his appeal, and that he was only truly sorry that he was condemned to die. On October 19, 1928, William Edward Hickman was hanged on the gallows in the San Quentin prison. Upon falling through the trapdoors of the gallows, Hickman struck his head and began violently twitching and jerking. According to witnesses, it took approximately 2 minutes for Hickman to die. An autopsy performed after his execution showed that Hickman's neck did not break during the hanging and that he had died from asphyxia. Some suggested divine intervention, pointing out the bittersweet irony of Hickman dying in the same way that Marion had. But this is merely a cold comfort. For as much as Hickman saw justice for his crimes, he was still able to wreak terrible suffering in the years he was alive. And no amount of his suffering would ever bring Marion back to her family. Thanks for sticking around till the end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to give the video a like and leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a terrifying tale. See you in the next one.